The cold wakes you before the light. It's a physical presence, a weight on your chest that seeps through the layers of hide and fur. Outside the rock shelter, the wind howls a familiar, endless song across a world buried in ice. Your breath plumes in the frigid air, a fleeting ghost in the gloom. The fire is a fistful of dying embers, casting long, dancing shadows against the stone walls. The smell is of smoke, of unwashed bodies, of old blood frozen into the dirt floor. But beneath it all is another sensation, an ache that begins deep in your belly and radiates to the tips of your fingers. It isn't pain, it is emptiness, a hollow, grinding hunger that has been your constant companion for months. You look at the others, huddled shapes in the darkness, and see the same hollow look in their eyes. The sun will not truly rise today, only stain the horizon for a few hours. And in that brief twilight, you must find something, anything, to keep the fire inside you from going out for good. This feeling, this cold emptiness in your gut, is the engine of human history. Before we explore what you must do to silence it, take a moment. Hold this image of a dawn 40,000 years ago, a dawn of desperate survival. Now, wherever you are, breathe. Wherever you're listening tonight, London, Los Angeles, a quiet room in Lagos, welcome to Sapiens Untold. We are a community gathered in the digital firelight, seeking to understand the deep, often brutal story of us. Where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Take a moment to settle in. Get comfortable. Dim the lights if you can. Our journey tonight goes to a place before history, to a time when survival was the only mystery that mattered. If questions like this pull at you the way they pull at me, stories buried in bone and ice, then hit like and subscribe. You are part of the exploration now. Now. Let's return to that fire, to the hunger that gnaws at your bones, and confront the most fundamental question of all. What is there to eat when the world dies? You are kneeling in the frozen mud of an excavated winter camp. The wind that cuts across this Siberian plain feels ancient, a ghost of the ice that once defined this world. In your gloved hand, you hold a fragment of a world, a piece of a woolly rhino's femur, heavy and dense as stone. It tells a story not of a triumphant feast, but of a desperate calculation. Your thumb traces a deep groove, a cut mark left by a flint blade 40,000 years ago. But it's the break that holds your attention. The bone wasn't sawn, it was shattered. A spiral fracture runs through it, the result of a powerful, deliberate strike with a hammerstone. This is a percussion fracture, the signature of a single, vital objective. Marrow. This is the evidence that rewrites our understanding of the hunter-gatherer diet. For the 8-month winter, you were not gathering. You were a carnivore. Isotopic analysis of Neanderthal and early human bone collagen confirms this with chilling clarity. The nitrogen-15 levels in their remains are staggeringly high, equivalent not to other primates, but to cave hyenas and Arctic foxes, apex predators. They ate meat, and almost nothing but meat. But lean muscle alone, even from a giant bison, is a death sentence. Without fat, the body cannot process protein, leading to a fatal condition known as protein poisoning. You could eat until your stomach was full and still starve to death. So you learn to butcher not just for flesh, but for fat. The marrow inside this rhino femur was a lifeline, a precious, energy-dense resource that stood between your clan and oblivion. After the organs were eaten raw for their vitamins, after the tongue and brain were consumed, you and your kin would have surrounded the carcass in the sub-zero twilight. You would have systematically broken every long bone, every vertebra, every mandible, scooping out the greasy contents with a bone shard. Nothing was wasted. Every shattered bone littering this site is a testament to that brutal equation. This was survival, but this was the best-case scenario. This was a successful hunt. What happened when the great herds vanished into the blizzard? The air in this Spanish cave is dead. It doesn't move. It carries the scent of limestone, wet earth, and a faint, coppery tang of something that has long since decayed. Your light beam dances across the floor, a litter of shattered bones from ibex and red deer, but your gaze fixes on one piece, half buried in the calcified sediment. It's a human tibia, a shin bone. As you brush away the dirt, you see them. Fine, parallel scratches near the joints, left by a flint knife systematically slicing away muscle. The shaft of the bone is broken open in the same way as the rhino femur, a spiral fracture from a heavy stone blow. And then you see the other marks, tiny, pitted indentations, gnaw marks, not from a wolf or a hyena. The dental arcade is too small, too flat. They are human. When the hunt failed, you became a hyena. You followed the real predators, the wolves and cave lions, waiting for them to finish their meal, hoping for scraps. You would drive them from their kill with fire and noise, a high-risk gamble for a frozen, half-eaten carcass. But even this was a luxury. What the bones in this cave reveal is the final, terrible option. Here, and at sites like Guff's Cave in England, human remains are found mixed indiscriminately with animal bones. They bear identical signatures of butchery, cut marks for defleshing, tongues removed, skulls cracked open to access the brain. This wasn't ritual. This was food processing. In the depths of the Ice Age winter, when the last of the cached meat was gone and the children's cries echoed in the darkness, the line between kin and calorie blurred. The body of someone who succumbed to cold or sickness was not a vessel for a soul to be mourned. It was a cache of fat and protein, the only thing that could keep the rest of the group alive for another week, another day. The gnaw marks on this bone are not a sign of monstrosity. They are the final, desperate testament of a people who had exhausted every other option, a people who chose survival over sentiment, because the ice offered no other choice. You are in a sterile laboratory, far from the ice. The object under your microscope doesn't look like much, a desiccated lump of human feces, a coprolite, recovered from a dry cave in Oregon. It is 13,000 years old, yet this humble relic is a time capsule, a direct snapshot of a meal eaten at the edge of existence. You adjust the focus, and the story comes alive. You see tiny fragments of bone, likely from a rabbit or a bird, gnawed and swallowed whole. There's hair, probably from the hide of the animal it came from. There are bits of charcoal from a meager fire. But then you see them, microscopic, perfectly preserved, and horrifying. The oval-shaped eggs of a tapeworm. Dozens of them. This meal was not a choice. It was an ultimatum. The cost of a carnivorous winter diet was not just the danger of the hunt, but the certainty of what came with the meat. Every carcass, whether hunted fresh or scavenged frozen, was a Trojan horse of parasites, raw or undercooked flesh from bison, reindeer, or even fish pulled from beneath the ice guaranteed infection. Tapeworms, trichinosis worms burrowing into muscle, roundworms, liver flukes. These were not occasional ailments. They were a chronic condition of Ice Age life. The constant internal bleeding and nutrient theft from these parasites meant you were malnourished, even with a full belly. You were perpetually weakened, anemic, and more vulnerable to the cold that was always trying to claim you. To survive, you had to make a chilling bargain. You could cook your meat thoroughly, killing the parasites, but also destroying the fragile vitamin C held within the raw organs. Do that, and you would die slowly and painfully from scurvy, your teeth loosening in their sockets, your old wounds reopening. Or you could eat the organs raw, get your vitamins, and accept the parasitic load as a simple, non-negotiable price for seeing the spring. The evidence from coprolites across the globe is unambiguous. Our ancestors chose to live with the worms because the alternative was not to live at all. This is not a story of heroic hunters feasting around a roaring fire. You stand on the shores of the Arctic Ocean, the wind so cold it feels like a physical blow. The sea ice stretches to the horizon, a fractured, brutal landscape of white. For coastal populations during the Ice Age, this was the larder. Seals, walrus, the occasional whale carcass washed ashore. These were prizes rich in the blubber that meant life. But this was not the only strategy. On the vast mammoth steppes of Eurasia, groups of Homo sapiens followed the great herds, their entire existence tied to the migratory patterns of bison and reindeer. In the mountain ranges, you would have followed the ibex and chamois to lower, more sheltered valleys as winter closed in, a vertical migration echoing that of your prey. Each environment demanded a different kind of genius, a different set of desperate skills. But one group seems to have taken this carnivory to its extreme. Neanderthals. Isotopic data suggests their diet was even more narrowly focused on large game than that of our direct ancestors. They were hyper-carnivores, specialists in a world that punished specialization. When the mammoth and rhino populations fluctuated, or when the more adaptable Homo sapiens competed for the same resources, the Neanderthals had fewer backup plans. Their dietary rigidity may have been a critical factor in their eventual disappearance, a cautionary tale written in the chemistry of their bones. And do not mistake this for the life of modern Inuit or Sami peoples. They have rifles, snowmobiles, metal tools, insulated clothing, and a global support network. You had a sharpened stone lashed to a wooden shaft. You had clothes stitched together with bone needles and sinew. You had no domesticates, no stored grains, no possibility of rescue. Every calorie was won through immense effort and terrifying risk. Your survival was a testament not to technology, but to a profound, intimate, and brutal understanding of a world that was actively trying to erase you. It was a masterpiece of resourcefulness, painted on a canvas of ice. You are left with a quiet reverence, a gratitude. Looking at the evidence, the shattered bones, the parasite eggs, the isotopic signatures of a wolf's diet, is to understand the profound debt we owe to these ancestors. We are the descendants of those who did not starve. Our genetics were forged in this crucible of feast and famine. Our bodies adapted to store fat in times of plenty and endure long periods of brutal scarcity. The very wiring of our metabolism is a relic of this world, a world where winter was the great filter of our species. Those who could not tolerate a diet of raw organs and greasy marrow, those whose bodies buckled under the parasitic load or the psychological stress of endless dark and cold, did not survive to pass on their genes. Life expectancy was short, perhaps 30 years, and winter was the primary cause of death. The bones of the very young and the old are tragically common in these frozen camps. This was not a failure, but a biological reality. To survive was an act of extraordinary will and desperate invention. Every scrap of hide, every splinter of bone, every last drop of blood was utilized with a resourcefulness born of necessity. They survived not because they were stronger, but because they were willing to do whatever it took to eat whatever moved or had recently stopped moving. To understand what they ate is to understand the razor's edge on which humanity balanced for hundreds of thousands of years. It fosters a deep appreciation for the moment. 10,000 years ago, when we first planted a seed and began the slow, arduous climb away from this desperation. The warmth of your room, the food in your kitchen, these are not givens. They are the inheritance of 1,000,000 winters endured, a legacy of survival purchased at an unimaginable cost. The hunger that haunted their world is finally, mercifully, quiet. The cold in here is different. It is a sterile, manufactured cold, a deep -40 degrees that numbs your face and makes the air sharp in your lungs. You stand in a vast, white archive, a library of time itself. Racks stretch into the distance, holding thousands of silver tubes. Each one contains a column of ice, a core drilled from the heart of the Greenland ice sheet, holding a frozen record of 100,000 years of Earth's history. An assistant in a thermal suit slides one of the tubes onto a light table. The ice within glows, an illuminated manuscript of compressed snow. You can see the layers clearly. Thin, dark bands of summer melt, alternating with thicker, lighter bands of winter accumulation. Each pair is a year. You lean closer, following the layers down, back through time. 10,000 years, 20, 40. Here the ice tells a different story. The bands are thicker, the composition different. Trapped within the frozen water are microscopic grains of pollen, analyzed and identified. Oak, elm, hazel, evidence of a world you would recognize, a northern Europe covered in temperate forests, a world of abundance, of berries and nuts, of diverse and plentiful game. This was the Eemian interglacial period, a warm spell, much like our own. The people who lived then had options. Their diet was broad, their lives dictated by a gentler rhythm of seasons. Then you see it, the line. It isn't gradual. In the space of a few inches of ice, representing less than a human lifetime, the pollen from the great forests simply vanishes. It is replaced by the hardy pollen of dwarf birch and tundra grasses, and then by nothing but atmospheric dust. The chemistry of the ice shifts, the isotopes screaming of a catastrophic drop in temperature. This is the moment the world broke. This is the beginning of the Great Freeze. For the humans who witnessed this, it was not a slow change. It was an environmental apocalypse. The world of plenty disappeared, and the long, desperate winter began. The diet of the apex predator was not a choice. It was an adaptation to a planet that had suddenly and violently turned against them. The mammoth's last breath hangs in the frozen air, a cloud of steam that crystallizes and vanishes. You kneel beside the mountain of flesh and hide, the ground around you stained dark against the snow. Your hands, slick with blood, are already numb with a cold that has nothing to do with the temperature. The work is frantic, a race against the encroaching darkness and the scent that will soon draw wolves and cave lions. This is not a feast. It is a race. The first prize is not the muscle meat, but the organs. You slice into the abdominal cavity, the steam rising from the body, a brief, false warmth. The liver, heart, and kidneys are eaten here now, raw and still warm. This is where you find your vitamin C, the only defense against the slow decay of scurvy. Next, the head. The massive skull is broken open with heavy stones to get at the brain, a dense package of fat and calories. The tongue is carved out, the eyes taken. Nothing is wasted. The blood is collected in hide bags or stomachs, drunk for its iron and salts. Back at the camp, the process becomes even more meticulous. The thick hide and subcutaneous fat are rendered down. The muscle is cut into strips to be frozen in caches dug into the permafrost. A risky pantry, always vulnerable to thieves like the wolverine. But the final act of extraction is the most telling. Once the marrow has been taken from the long bones, the remaining fragments are shattered into thumb-sized pieces. These are boiled for hours in a hide-lined pit filled with water and hot stones. A greasy scum rises to the surface, skimmed off and stored. This is bone grease, the last ghost of nutrients, a final desperate hedge against starvation. The pulverized bone fragments left behind, found by the thousands in the hearths of ancient camps, are the archaeological proof of this total consumption. A single mammoth was a walking mountain of life-giving fat. But these giants were rare, and the hunts were monumentally dangerous. What sustained you in the long, lean weeks between the great kills? Your boots crunch on something other than snow. You are standing in a shallow pit scraped down to the permafrost, inside the remains of a 30,000-year-old dwelling on the Ukrainian plains. The walls of this ancient structure were not made of wood or stone, but of mammoth bones, hundreds of them, interlocked into a dome. But it's the floor that tells the story of the day-to-day struggle. You kneel and pick up a handful of the debris. It's a dense mat of tiny, bleached bones, the remains of Arctic hare, ptarmigan, and fox. This is the background radiation of the Ice Age diet. The great hunts were rare windfalls. Survival depended on the small game, the things that could be caught by the children and the elderly, the low-risk, low-reward calories that kept the hunger from becoming fatal. Nets woven from plant fiber or animal sinew were set for birds, snares for hares. You would have had to know the landscape with an impossible intimacy, where the hibernating marmots slept in their burrows, where to break the ice on a river to spear a sluggish fish, which grubs were still alive in the frozen bark of the few hardy trees. Anything that moved was a potential meal. This relentless pursuit of small packages of protein is written on the bones of your ancestors. Their teeth are worn flat, not just from a tough diet, but from the grit and sand that inevitably contaminated every meal cooked on an open hearth. The constant chewing of sinew to make cordage and hides to soften them for clothing also left its mark. These people were not just hunters of giants. They were masters of the miniature, their lives a constant grinding effort to extract calories from a world that offered them up grudgingly, in the smallest and most difficult of packages. The mammoth feasts were memories that sustained them psychologically. The hares and birds were what sustained them physically. Day after day, the sun on your face feels alien. You are standing on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, where the air is thick and warm. The water laps gently at your feet. An archaeologist wades out of the shallows, a dripping object in her hands. She passes it to you. It is a simple basalt stone, smoothed by water, but its weight is familiar. Your fingers find the shallow, worn depression in its center, a surface polished to a sheen not by the lake, but by thousands of hours of repetitive motion. It is a grinding stone, and it should not be here. Not like this. This place is a hollow too, a 23,000-year-old campsite, submerged for millennia until drought revealed its secrets. It dates to the height of the last glacial maximum, when most of the world was locked in ice. And yet, this stone, and thousands of others like it, tell a story that defies the narrative of the pure carnivore. Analysis of the residue on these tools and of the surrounding earth reveals a shocking truth. Starch grains, the ghostly fingerprints of wild barley and wheat. The site is a treasure trove, the charred remains of a brush hut, a hearth, and more than 90,000 preserved seeds and fruits, almonds, olives, pistachios, grapes. This was not agriculture, but it was a systematic, sophisticated knowledge of the plant world, a technology for processing wild cereals into flour, 10,000 years before the official dawn of farming. For this one small band of humans, in this one protected, well-watered corner of the world, survival was not solely a matter of chasing mammoths. They had a pantry, they had choice, they had starch, and the unique, soul-deep satisfaction of bread. But theirs was a life lived on an island of temperate calm in a global ocean of ice. For the vast majority of our ancestors shivering on the frozen plains of Eurasia, the memory of a taste like this would have been an almost unbearable dream. This drowned world is a whisper of what was possible, and a stark reminder of the brutal reality that faced everyone else. The lab is silent, cooled to a precise temperature to protect the ancient dead. The only sound is the low, steady hum of the electron microscope. You lean forward, your eye to the monitor, and a strange, grey landscape resolves into view. It is pitted and cratered, a moonscape of fossilized material. This is not a distant world. It is the surface of a Neanderthal's tooth, magnified 1,000 times. The landscape you are exploring is dental calculus, 40,000 years of hardened plaque, an intimate archaeological site clinging to the enamel. The scientist beside you points to a shape on the screen, a ghostly oval trapped within the mineralized matrix, a starch granule. For decades, we saw Neanderthals as obligate carnivores, hunters of mammoths and nothing more. But here, locked in the plaque of an individual who lived and died in Spy Cave, Belgium, is the undeniable proof of plants. Not just starch from wild grasses, but chemical signatures of dates and even compounds found in poplar bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. This wasn't just food, it was self-medication. This person may have been chewing on bark to soothe the pain of a dental abscess, a dark cavity clearly visible on the tooth's root. You zoom out slightly and the story broadens. The surface of the tooth is a map of a hard life. Microscopic scratches, all running in the same direction, reveal how this individual used their mouth as a third hand, clamping down on a hide with their front teeth while scraping it clean with a stone tool, a slip of the flint leaving a permanent mark. Tiny fragments of charcoal are embedded in the calculus, inhaled from a lifetime of crouching by the fire in a smoky cave. This is more than a diet. It is a biography. The plaque, once dismissed as pathological debris, has become one of our richest sources of information, a microscopic time capsule preserving the last meals, the illnesses, and the behaviors of a single, long-vanished person. The roar of the mammoth hunt is silent now, but the whisper of a toothache still echoes here. The psychological toll is impossible to measure, but you can feel its shadow in the long, dark months. Imagine living in a world of near total sensory deprivation. The sun is a pale smear on the horizon for only a few hours. The landscape is a monochrome canvas of white snow and black rock. The diet is a monotonous rotation of fat and flesh, leaving a constant, gnawing craving for the memory of sweetness, of texture, of green. The hunger is not just physiological, it is psychological. A hunger for novelty, for color, for a world that isn't actively trying to freeze you to death. This unrelenting stress is a corrosive force. It frays the bonds of kinship. The pressure to provide food in a barren world creates tensions that can shatter a small, isolated group. Infant and elderly mortality would have skyrocketed during these months. A crying baby was not just a source of annoyance, but a drain on precious calories. An elder who could no longer hunt or process hides became another mouth to feed in a world with no surplus. The decisions made in the flickering firelight of an Ice Age winter were likely brutal, pragmatic, and heartbreaking. We see the echo of this trauma in the art they left behind. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet are not depictions of a balanced ecosystem. They are obsessive, hypnotic renderings of the megafauna that held the power of life and death. The bison, the aurochs, the mammoths, these were not just animals. They were symbols of fat, of warmth, of survival. They were prayers painted on stone in the deep, dark belly of the earth. Perhaps a form of sympathetic magic, an attempt to will a successful hunt into existence. These galleries are not just humanity's first art. They are a testament to a world where hunger was the primary engine of culture, spirituality, and despair. The meal ends, but the hunger remains. You lie wrapped in furs, listening to the wind, your stomach full of rendered fat and stringy muscle. Yet your body aches for something else. This persistent, unsatisfied hunger was the baseline condition of winter. But there was one last, desperate pantry, a ghost garden that could occasionally be harvested, even from beneath the snow. You follow the tracks of a herd of reindeer or bison to where they have scraped away the snow to feed. With a digging stick hardened in the fire, you break through the frozen crust of the earth into their feeding crater. Your prize is not a plant, but the contents of a stomach. You pull out the rumen of a freshly killed reindeer. It is a large greenish bag, heavy and warm. You slice it open, and the smell is a bizarre mix of fermented vegetation and animal musk. Inside is a partially digested mash of lichens, mosses, and hardy tundra grasses, the reindeer's last meal. To modern sensibilities, it is unthinkable. To you, it is a treasure. This acidic, half-digested slurry is one of the only sources of plant fiber and trace nutrients available in the deep of winter. Archaeological evidence for this practice is elusive, a soft tissue behavior that leaves few traces. But the logic is inescapable, and the practice is documented among historical Arctic peoples. Some scholars even suggest that the starchy residues found on Neanderthal teeth may not have come from direct consumption of grains, but from eating the stomach contents of their prey. It was a way to outsource the difficult work of digestion, to let the animal's powerful four-chambered stomach do the work of breaking down the tough cellulose. This was the final act of complete carcass utilization, a revolting but ingenious solution to a nutritional puzzle. You would eat the animal, and you would eat what the animal ate, because nothing, absolutely nothing, could be allowed to go to waste. You stand on a precipice, not of stone, but of time. Before you lies the abyss of the younger Dryas, a sudden, savage return to Ice Age conditions that began around 12,900 years ago, just as the world was beginning to warm. For 1,000 years, the cold returned with a vengeance. It was a brutal punctuation mark at the end of a long, hard sentence, and it may have been the catalyst for everything we call civilization. In the face of this renewed climate chaos, the old ways of hunting and gathering, even the sophisticated methods seen at Ohalo too, began to fail. The choice was stark: adapt or vanish. It is in the shadow of this final cold snap that we see the first true stirrings of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. The wild grasses that had been a supplemental food source for millennia suddenly became the focus of intense experimentation. Someone, somewhere, made the connection between a fallen seed and a new stalk of wheat. They began to cultivate, to select for larger grains, for tougher stems. It was not a single invention, but a slow, hesitant process of co-evolution between humans and plants, born of desperation. This was not a quest for a better life. It was a hedge against extinction. Farming was harder work than foraging. It was less reliable, more prone to catastrophic failure from drought or disease. The early farmers were shorter, sicker, and died younger than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. But they had one crucial advantage. They could produce a surplus. They could store calories against the inevitable lean times. In the face of the younger Dryas, this ability to create a buffer, however meager, was the difference between life and death. The grinding stone became the millstone, the foundation of a new world, a world where the spectre of the Ice Age winter, while never entirely banished, finally began to recede into memory. The taste of bread was the taste of a future. The air in the arroyo is still and hot. You stand in the trench of an archaeological dig in New Mexico, the sun beating down on the pale, dry earth. A geologist points to a feature in the stratified wall of dirt. It is a thin, dark line, no thicker than your finger, running perfectly level across the exposed strata. This is the black mat, a layer of carbon-rich soil found at dozens of sites across North America, all dating to precisely 12,900 years ago. Below this line, the earth is teeming with the bones of mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths, alongside the distinctive stone tools of the Clovis people who hunted them. Above the line, silence. The megafauna are gone. The Clovis points vanish. Something happened here. Something catastrophic. For a century, the dominant theory was that the Clovis hunters, masters of the mammoth steppe, simply overhunted their prey to extinction. But the sheer speed and continental scale of the disappearance has always troubled researchers. The black mat seems to mark a single, devastating event. Within this thin layer, scientists have found shocking evidence. Microscopic diamonds formed under immense pressure and heat, tiny spherules of melted rock, elevated levels of iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids and comets. This is the fingerprint of an extraterrestrial impact. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that a fragmented comet or asteroid struck the North American ice sheet, triggering unimaginable wildfires, a toxic atmospheric haze that blocked the sun, and the sudden catastrophic climate reversal of the Younger Dryas. It wasn't just the cold that killed the great beasts and shattered the Clovis culture. It was the sky falling. For the survivors, the world was remade in fire and ice. The reliable migrations of the great herds ended overnight. The intimate knowledge of the landscape, passed down for generations, became obsolete. They were thrown back into a state of desperate improvisation, their pantries empty, their world a toxic winter. The story of survival had to begin all over again, on a planet that had become profoundly and terrifyingly alien. You are no longer in the field. The harsh sunlight of the dig site is replaced by the cool, filtered light of a university laboratory. A researcher hands you a small glass vial containing a fine grey dust, a sample meticulously collected from the black mat layer. Under an electron microscope, this dust reveals a secret landscape. Among the ordinary grains of quartz and feldspar, you see them, hexagonal crystals, mere nanometers across, that glitter with an unnatural fire. These are lonsdaleite, a form of diamond that only forms under conditions of extreme shock and pressure, conditions found in the heart of a meteorite impact. This evidence, once controversial, is now accumulating at sites across the globe that share the same date, the same sudden extinction boundary. From a lakebed in Mexico to an archaeological site in Syria, the impact proxies are the same: nanodiamonds, melt glass, elevated iridium. The picture that emerges is of a planetary catastrophe. The impact itself would have been terrifying, but the aftermath would have been the true killer. A nuclear winter scenario, where dust and soot from continent-spanning wildfires choked the atmosphere, blocking sunlight for years. Temperatures would have plummeted, plants would have withered. The great herds, deprived of their forage, would have starved. And what of the humans who witnessed this? Their oral traditions may hold the last fading echoes of this event. Creation myths from cultures across the Americas are filled with stories of a world destroyed by fire and flood, of a great darkness, of stars falling from the sky. For generations, these stories were dismissed as primitive allegories. But what if they are eyewitness accounts? What if they are the last surviving memories of the day the world ended? Memories passed down around the fire by the traumatized survivors who had to learn all over again how to eat in a world where everything they knew had turned to ash and ice. The nanodiamonds in the dust do not just speak of an impact. They speak of a memory, a great forgetting, and a new, harder beginning. The air is thin, stinging your lungs with each breath. You stand on a high, wind-scoured plateau in the Peruvian Andes, 4,000 meters above sea level. Below you, terraced fields cling to the mountainside, a patchwork of impossible green against the grey rock. This is a landscape engineered for survival, a testament to a completely different solution to the problem of winter. Here, in the cradle of the Inca, the megafauna was smaller, vicuña, guanaco, and the winters, while cold, were defined not by ice, but by altitude. The great innovation here was not a new hunting technique, but a profound mastery of botany. You kneel in a field of quinoa, its feathered seed heads rustling in the wind. This plant, alongside corn and beans, formed the foundation of Andean civilization. The Three Sisters, as they were known further north, were a nutritional powerhouse. Corn provided carbohydrates, beans provided protein, and squash, grown between the rows, suppressed weeds and retained moisture. But it was the potato, a humble tuber domesticated in these mountains over 7,000 years ago, that was the true key to unlocking the highlands. There are over 4,000 varieties of potato native to this region, each adapted to a specific altitude, soil type, and climate. This was not just farming, it was a sophisticated, distributed system of risk management. If one crop failed due to frost or drought at a particular altitude, another, planted in a different microclimate, would likely survive. and they developed a technology to conquer scarcity: freeze drying. Potatoes were spread out on the ground, left to freeze in the frigid mountain nights and thaw in the intense daytime sun. This cycle was repeated for days, the potatoes periodically trampled to press out the water. The result was chonyo, a lightweight, nutritionally dense, and nearly imperishable food source that could be stored for years, a bulwark against famine. The people of the Andes did not just endure winter, they domesticated it, transforming the killing cold of the high mountains into a tool for preservation. What haunts you is not the difference, but the similarity. You stand in the quiet hum of a seed vault, surrounded by millions of carefully catalogued specimens from around the world. The climate-controlled air feels a world away from the Andes, and yet the principle is the same. The Andean mastery of agriculture was not an isolated event. As the Ice Age loosened its grip on the planet, something extraordinary happened. In at least 7 different locations around the globe, completely independently of one another, humans began to domesticate plants and animals. In the Fertile Crescent, it was wheat and barley. In China, rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, corn, beans and squash. In the Andes, potatoes and quinoa. In New Guinea, taro and bananas. For hundreds of thousands of years, our species had been nomadic hunters and foragers. Then, in the geological blink of an eye, in geographically isolated pockets, we began to settle down and cultivate the earth. It was a sudden, global symphony of agriculture, with each culture composing its own unique melody based on the notes provided by their local ecology. Why then? Why, after 2 million years of the Paleolithic lifestyle, did this revolution happen everywhere at once? The retreat of the great ice sheets created a more stable, predictable climate, making the long-term investment of farming a viable strategy for the first time. The disappearance of the megafauna may have forced the issue, removing the great walking larders that had sustained humanity for so long. But perhaps there is another element, a cognitive leap, a new way of seeing the world and humanity's place within it. The survivors of the Ice Age were not the same people who had entered it. They had endured millennia of brutal selection, their minds honed by the relentless pressure to innovate. The seed of agriculture may have been planted not in the soil, but in a human mind that had finally learned to see the deep patterns of the natural world, a mind that had learned the hard lesson that the only way to truly conquer winter was to prepare for it, long before the first snows fell. The night sky here is an ocean of cold, sharp points of light. There are no cities for 100 miles to dim the stars. You stand beside a megalithic circle in the Egyptian desert at Nabta Playa, a site 1,000 years older than Stonehenge. The stones are aligned to the summer solstice and the seasonal rising of certain stars. To become a farmer is to become an astronomer. The nomadic hunter follows the herds. The farmer must follow the heavens. The ability to predict the seasons, to know the precise moment to plant and the precise moment to harvest, becomes a matter of life and death. This celestial knowledge is a thread that connects all early agricultural societies. In the Andes, farmers watched the Pleiades star cluster. If the stars appeared bright and clear in June, it predicted a year of good rains. If they were hazy, it signaled a coming drought, and the farmers would plant their potatoes deeper to protect them. The great temple of Karnak in Egypt was aligned to the winter solstice sunrise. The entire Mayan civilization was built around a complex, interlocking series of calendars, one of which tracked the cycles of Venus with an accuracy we didn't match until the 20th century. This was not abstract science. It was a technology of survival. The sky was the ultimate clock, the ultimate calendar, the ultimate guarantor against the return of the chaotic hunger of the past. The shaman who could read the stars held immense power, for he held the key to the harvest. The great stone circles and temple alignments were not just places of worship, they were observatories, mnemonic devices carved in stone to preserve this critical knowledge across generations. They are the architectural embodiment of a promise that by watching the sky, humanity would never again have to face the long, dark winter unprepared. The ghosts of the Ice Age were kept at bay, not just by the plough, but by the patient, watchful gaze of the first astronomers. The transition was not clean. For thousands of years, the old ways and the new existed side by side. You stand at the edge of a reedy marsh in northern Europe 7,000 years ago. This is the world of the Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age. The great ice sheets have retreated, but the dense forests have not yet fully reclaimed the land. Here, hunter-gatherers still thrive, but their diet has shifted. The mammoths are gone, replaced by red deer, wild boar, and a rich bounty from the rivers and coasts. At sites like Starcar in England, archaeologists have found the remains of massive feasts, dozens of deer butchered at once, their antlers used to make barbed spear points for hunting pike and eel. But something else is found here too, something that whispers of the coming change. In the preserved peat bogs, researchers have found the faint traces of cereal pollen, not from local wild grasses, but from the domesticated wheat and barley of the Near East. This wasn't farming. Not yet. It was contact. Ideas, and perhaps seeds, were traveling along ancient trade networks, passed from group to group across thousands of miles. The hunter-gatherers of Mesolithic Europe were not isolated primitives. They were aware of the revolution happening to the south. For a long time, they seemed to have rejected it. Why would they? Their diet was more varied, their health better, their lives less arduous than those of the first farmers. They had a deep, sustainable relationship with their environment, a knowledge of the land that allowed them to live in a state of what some have called primitive affluence. But the agricultural world was expanding, its populations growing, its demand for land relentless. The fields of wheat and barley were not just a new way to get food, they were a new way of organizing society, a new way of thinking about property and power. The encounter in this marsh was not a meeting of equals. It was the beginning of a slow, inexorable collision between two worlds, a collision that would ultimately lead to the end of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle and the final closing of the Paleolithic mind. The last echoes of the Ice Age winter were about to be silenced by the rustle of a field of wheat. The granary is the heart of the village. You stand inside a stone structure in a pueblo in the American Southwest, the air thick with the sweet, dusty smell of dried corn. The walls are lined with ceramic pots, each a different size and shape, each containing a different variety of maize. There are cobs of blue corn, red corn, white corn, yellow corn, each one the result of generations of careful selection and cultivation. This is not just food, it is a library of genetic information, a sacred inheritance. The responsibility for maintaining this library fell to specific members of the community, often women, who became the keepers of the seed. This role was a position of immense cultural importance. The seed keepers were not just farmers, They were geneticists, historians, and spiritual leaders. They understood that the diversity of their crops was the key to their survival. Some varieties of corn were drought-resistant, others were pest-resistant, others grew faster in cooler weather. By planting a wide variety of strains, they ensured that no single climatic event could wipe out their entire food supply. This was a sophisticated, living insurance policy, a buffer against the chaos of the natural world. The seeds themselves were treated with a reverence that is hard for us to comprehend. They were seen as living beings, gifts from the gods that contained the spark of life for the next generation. The planting and harvesting were accompanied by elaborate rituals, songs, and ceremonies, all designed to honor the sacred relationship between the people and the plants that sustained them. This was a profound shift in consciousness. The Ice Age hunter saw the world as a place of scarcity, a larder to be plundered. The first farmers began to see the world as a partner, a garden to be tended. The keeping of the seed was the first great act of looking forward, of planning not just for the next winter, but for the winters of their children's children. It was an act of faith in the future, a belief that the cycle of planting and harvest would continue, a bulwark against the return of the long, hungry darkness. But the memory of cataclysm lingered. You sit in the hushed archives of a library, turning the fragile pages of a medieval manuscript. It contains a copy of a much older text, the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's earliest surviving works of literature. In it, the hero seeks out an immortal man named Utnapishtim, a survivor of a great flood sent by the gods to wipe out humanity. The story is hauntingly familiar, an echo of the biblical tale of Noah. But this is just one thread in a vast global tapestry. Over 500 flood myths have been documented from cultures all over the world, from the Aztecs of Mexico to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. For centuries, these were considered a mere myths. But what if, like the stories of falling stars, they are the distorted memories of a real, planet-altering event? The end of the Younger Dryas was not a gentle warming. It was a period of catastrophic meltwater pulses from the collapsing ice sheets. Sea levels rose by more than 100 meters, drowning vast coastal plains that had once been prime human habitat. The world's coastlines were violently redrawn. Entire landscapes vanished beneath the waves. For the people who lived on those coasts, it would have been an apocalypse. Could the legend of a lost civilization, a great flood, and a handful of survivors who carried the seeds of knowledge into a new world, a story that appears in Plato's account of Atlantis, in the Hindu Vedas, in the myths of the Hopi, be the last, faint echo of this time? Perhaps the seed keepers were not just preserving the genetic diversity of their crops. Perhaps they were preserving the fragile flame of civilization itself, carrying the knowledge of a drowned world into the sunlit highlands, the last survivors of a forgotten chapter of the human story. The flood was not the end of the world. It was the violent, traumatic birth of our own. The afternoon sun is warm on the limestone ruins. You are in Delphi, Greece, a place the ancient Greeks considered the center of the world. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, you stand before the foundations of the Temple of Apollo, where for 1,000 years the oracle, the Pythia, breathed in vapors from a chasm in the earth and spoke prophecies that shaped the course of empires. This place is steeped in a specific kind of memory, a memory of a time before the Olympians, a time of earth goddesses and chthonic deities. The myths tell us that before Apollo claimed this site, it belonged to Gaia, the primordial Earth Mother. This is a pattern repeated across the ancient world. The great sky god religions of the classical era were often superimposed on much older, earth-based belief systems. The transition from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic was not just a change in diet, it was a profound shift in cosmology. The hunter's world was animistic, a world of powerful animal spirits and the capricious forces of nature. The farmer's world became one of cyclical time, of fertility, of the earth as a mother who gives life and receives the dead. But this new religion came with a new set of anxieties. The hunter fears the failure of the hunt. The farmer fears the failure of the harvest. A single hailstorm, a plague of locusts, a prolonged drought. Any of these could mean mass starvation. And so, a new kind of ritual was born, the sacrifice. The first fruits of the harvest, the finest calf from the herd, were offered back to the gods in a desperate plea for their continued favor. In the most extreme cases, this logic led to human sacrifice, a practice found in early agricultural societies from the Aztecs to the Shang dynasty in China. It was a terrible, brutal calculus, the offering of a few lives to ensure the survival of the many. The fear of winter, the deep ancestral memory of starvation, had not vanished. It had simply changed its form, echoing in the prayers of the priests and the blood on the altar. You are deep underground. The air is cold, dry, and utterly still. A heavy steel door hisses open, revealing a long tunnel carved into the permafrost of a Norwegian mountain. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, the deepest and most secure pantry in the world. Racks stretch for 100 meters into the frozen rock, holding millions of foil packets. Each one contains a sample of seeds, a backup copy of the world's agricultural biodiversity. There are over 1 million varieties of crops stored here. Ancient strains of Ethiopian wheat, rare Andean potatoes, heirloom tomatoes from 1,000 different traditions. This is the modern expression of a 10,000-year-old anxiety. It is a monument to our collective memory of hunger. We built this place because we understand, on some deep, instinctual level, how fragile our food supply is. We remember the Irish potato famine, the Ukrainian Holodomor, the Dust Bowl of the American plains. These are our modern, younger Dryas events, moments when a shift in climate or politics brought the spectre of mass starvation roaring back into the modern world. The seeds resting in this frozen vault are the direct descendants of the wild grasses first cultivated in the Fertile Crescent, the humble tubers first nurtured in the Andes. They are the product of millennia of careful selection, a genetic library curated by countless generations of anonymous farmers. This vault is our ultimate act of preservation, an attempt to safeguard the accumulated wisdom of the Neolithic revolution against the uncertainties of the future. It is a quiet, cold, and profoundly hopeful place, a testament to the idea that the greatest treasure our species possesses is not gold or monuments, but the simple, miraculous potential locked inside a seed. It is the final, definitive answer to the brutal question posed by the Ice Age winter. Here, in the deepest pantry on Earth, we have stored the means to begin again. The last artifact of this lost world is not made of stone or bone. It is something far more ephemeral, yet strangely more durable. Language. You sit in a circle with a group of Sami elders in the far north of Scandinavia, their faces weathered maps of a life lived in the cold. You listen as they speak, their language a complex, ancient music. Within it are hundreds of words for snow and ice, each describing a specific condition with a precision that English lacks. There is a word for the thin, treacherous ice that forms on the edges of rivers, another for the granular, wind-blasted snow of the high tundra, another for the wet, heavy snow that signals the coming of the spring melt. This is not poetry. It is a technology of survival, a mental toolkit for navigating a dangerous and unforgiving environment. To have the word for a particular type of snow is to recognize it, to understand its properties, to know if it can be traveled on, if it will bear the weight of a reindeer, if it is good for building a shelter. This intricate vocabulary is the linguistic fossil of a mind that was constantly, obsessively focused on the nuances of the natural world. The languages of the first farmers tell a different story. Their vocabularies exploded with words for kinship, for property, for social hierarchy. Words for my field, your herd, his debt. The focus of their attention had shifted from the external world to the internal world of human society. The rise of agriculture was also the rise of the village, the town, the city, and with it a new set of problems. How to organize large groups of people, how to distribute resources, how to resolve disputes. The language of survival became the language of civilization. But in the quiet clicking and soft vowels of the world's last hunter-gatherer languages, you can still hear the faint echo of a different way of being, a time when the most important thing in the world was having the right word for the snow that was about to fall. You are flying over the Nazca Desert in Peru. Below you, etched into the dark, rust-colored plain, are shapes of impossible scale and precision. A hummingbird, its wings outstretched, nearly 100 meters long. A spider, a monkey, a condor. And then there are the straight lines, hundreds of them, running ruler straight for kilometers, converging and diverging in complex geometric patterns. They are so large they are only truly visible from the air. Who were they for? For decades, these lines were a mystery, attributed to everyone from ancient astronauts to a lost civilization. But recent scholarship offers a more profound and more human explanation. The lines are pathways, ritual pathways. Many of them point directly to sources of water in this, one of the driest places on Earth. The animal geoglyphs are not just pictures, they are constellations, earthly reflections of the celestial patterns that govern the seasons and the rains. The Nazca were farmers in an extreme environment, their lives entirely dependent on the meager flow of water from the Andes. The lines were a form of prayer, a way of ritually mapping their cosmos onto the land, of tying together the sky, the water, and the earth. Walking these lines was a pilgrimage, a performance, an act of communion with the powerful forces that governed their survival. This is the ultimate expression of the Neolithic mind. The hunter-gatherer reads the landscape, the farmer redesigns it. They impose a human geometry onto the chaos of nature, a grid of fields, canals, and ceremonial pathways. The entire world becomes a kind of garden, a space to be ordered, managed, and understood. The straight lines of Nazca, like the astronomical alignments of Stonehenge or the grid-like layout of the first cities, are a testament to a mind that no longer sees itself as merely a part of nature, but as its master. It is a confidence born of the granary, of the surplus, of the belief that humanity had finally, after 1,000,000 years of struggle, figured out how to keep the winter at bay. The research vessel rocks gently on the calm waters of the Persian Gulf. On the screen in front of you, a bathymetric map resolves into view. a high-resolution image of the seabed created by sonar. You are looking at a world no human eye has seen for 8,000 years. The ghostly image of a river channel winds across the seafloor. Beside it, the faint, regular outlines of what can only be man-made structures. This was once dry land, a fertile oasis watered by 4 great rivers, including the Tigris and Euphrates. Today, it is 100 meters beneath the waves. At the peak of the last ice age, so much of the world's water was locked up in the continental ice sheets that sea levels were 120 meters lower than they are today. The world's coastlines were vastly different. Britain was connected to Europe by a vast inhabited plain called Doggerland. Australia and New Guinea were a single continent. The Persian Gulf was a river valley. These coastal plains would have been the richest, most productive ecosystems on the planet, teeming with life, and they would have been the preferred habitat for our ancestors. The story of human civilization, as we know it, is the story of the survivors who were driven to the highlands, the coastal people, the maritime cultures, the inhabitants of these lost Edens. Their stories were almost entirely washed away by the rising seas. All we have left are the faint traces on the seabed and the persistent global myths of a great flood. We are a species with amnesia, haunted by the memory of a drowned world. The search for Atlantis is not a search for a single, mythical island. It is the search for the lost chapter of our own history, a chapter that begins not in the mountains and deserts, but on the rich coastal plains that now lie in the silent, sunless deep. What technologies, what knowledge, what ways of being were lost to the waves? The evidence is not always monumental. Sometimes it is microscopic, hidden in plain sight, inside of us. You are in a genetics lab, watching as a computer screen fills with the 4-letter code of a human genome. Modern genetic sequencing allows us to read the history written in our own DNA, to identify the echoes of ancient migrations, adaptations, and bottlenecks. And within the genomes of modern populations, we can see the fingerprints of the survivors. Consider the genes for fat metabolism. Populations with a long history of living in Arctic or subarctic conditions, like the Inuit of Greenland, have unique genetic variants that allow them to thrive on a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet that would be detrimental to other groups. These are the genetic legacies of the Ice Age apex predator, adaptations that allowed their ancestors to efficiently process a diet of seal blubber and caribou marrow. Or consider the lactase persistence gene, the mutation that allows many adults of European and African descent to digest milk. This gene only became common after the domestication of cattle, a powerful example of how our diet has literally reshaped our DNA. But the story is not always one of successful adaptation. We can also see the scars. Many modern diseases, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, are thought to be the result of a mismatch between our Paleolithic genes and our modern high-carbohydrate diet. Our bodies are still wired for a world of feast and famine, optimized to store fat in times of plenty to survive the inevitable scarcity. In a world of constant, unprecedented abundance, that ancient survival mechanism has become a pathology. We carry the ghosts of the Ice Age winter within our very cells. The hunger of our ancestors has become our own, a deep metabolic echo that we are only now beginning to understand. Our DNA is the ultimate archaeological site, a living record of the long, hard journey from the mammoth steppe to the supermarket aisle. You are in the British Museum, but far from the public galleries. In a climate-controlled storeroom, a curator opens a long, flat drawer. Inside, nestled on a bed of archival foam, lie a collection of clay tablets covered in the wedge-shaped script of cuneiform. These are the administrative records of the ancient Sumerian city of Ur, dating back more than 4,000 years. They are lists, endless, meticulous lists of grain, of livestock, of beer, of textiles. This is the world's oldest bureaucracy, and it was invented for a single purpose: to manage the surplus. The agricultural revolution created a new kind of wealth, a wealth that could be stored, measured, and most importantly, taxed. The granary was not just a pantry, it was the bank, the treasury, the entire economic engine of the first states. The king or priest who controlled the granary controlled the people. In times of plenty, he distributed rations. In times of famine, he held the power of life and death. Writing itself may have been invented, not to record poetry or myths, but to keep track of who owed what to the central storehouse. This new system created a stability and a scale of social organization that was previously unimaginable. It allowed for the specialization of labor, the soldier, the scribe, the artisan. That is the hallmark of civilization. But it also created a new kind of vulnerability. The hunter-gatherer band was resilient. If one food source failed, they could move on to another. The agricultural state was a monoculture, often dependent on a single staple crop. A failure of the wheat or rice harvest could bring a civilization to its knees. The history of the ancient world is a history of famines, of collapses, of dark ages triggered by climate shifts or crop failures. The fear of winter had been replaced by the fear of the tax collector and the fear of the empty granary. The surplus was a buffer, but it was also a cage. You end where you began, with the cold, not the visceral, life-threatening cold of the Ice Age winter, but the quiet, contemplative chill of a museum gallery. You stand before the skeleton of a Neanderthal, its bones heavy and robust, its ribcage broad and deep. This was a body built for the cold, a masterpiece of biological engineering. And yet, it vanished. Beside it stands the skeleton of an early Homo sapiens, a Cro-Magnon, its frame lighter, more gracile. This is the body that inherited the earth. The story of what we ate is the story of how we survived. For 2 million years, that story was written in blood and fat, in the desperate search for calories in a world of ice. The cost was immense, a life of constant hunger, chronic parasitic infection, and the ever-present threat of a sudden, violent end. But this brutal crucible forged the very qualities that define us: our resourcefulness, our adaptability, our capacity for complex social cooperation, our ability to imagine a different future and then build it. The agricultural revolution was not the end of this story, but a new chapter. It solved the problem of the winter larder, but it created a host of new problems: social inequality, epidemic disease, environmental degradation, the deep anxiety about starvation, the legacy of the younger Dryas, and the long winter that preceded it, still echoes in our myths, our religions, and our economics. We are the children of the survivors, carrying the genetic and cultural memories of their struggle within us. To look upon these ancient bones is to feel a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the warmth of a heated room, for the casual abundance of a supermarket, for the simple, miraculous fact that for most of us, the hunger is finally quiet. The long winter is over, at least for now. The fire crackles, a small point of warmth against the immense dark quiet of the Australian outback. You are sitting with an elder of the Pitjantjatjara people, his face a landscape of deep lines, his eyes holding the light of a fire that has been passed down for 60,000 years. He speaks in a low voice, telling a story not from a book, but from a continuous, unbroken chain of memory that stretches back into the Ice Age. He is telling you the story of the dreaming, the time when the great ancestral beings walked the earth and created the landscape you see around you. He points to a rock formation on the horizon, glowing red in the last light of the sun. To you, it is a geological feature. To him, it is the fossilized body of a giant serpent, left behind after a great battle in the dreamtime. Every feature of this landscape, every riverbed, every waterhole, every mountain, has a story. This is not just mythology, it is a mnemonic map, a way of encoding vast amounts of practical, life-saving information about the environment into a narrative that can be remembered and retold for thousands of years. The stories tell you where to find water in a drought, which plants are edible and which are poison, how to read the tracks of an emu. This is the genius of the oral tradition. In a world without writing, knowledge is a fragile, precious thing. It must be woven into the fabric of culture, into song, into dance, into story. The knowledge keepers, the elders, are the living libraries of their people. Their minds hold the accumulated wisdom of countless generations of survivors. What we are learning, as we listen with humility to the world's indigenous peoples, is that the archaeological record is only one part of the story. The other part, the human part, is still alive, still being told around the fire, a quiet testament to the resilience of memory and the enduring power of a story well told. The answers are not all buried in the dust. Some of them are waiting in the quiet of the desert, in the voice of an elder. The story the elder tells is not just about a serpent. It is about a time when the climate was different, when the great salt lake of Lake Eyre was a freshwater sea, teeming with fish and birds. Geologists have confirmed this. The oral traditions of the local people contain an accurate environmental history of the last 10,000 years, a history that has been passed down generation to generation with astonishing fidelity. They tell of the flooding of coastal plains at the end of the Ice Age, of the appearance of new volcanoes, of the slow drying of the continent's interior. These are not just stories, they are data. This marriage of indigenous knowledge and modern science is opening a new frontier of understanding. In Canada, Inuit oral traditions about the locations of ancient caribou hunting grounds are helping archaeologists locate sites that are thousands of years old. In the Pacific Northwest, tribal stories of giant waves have led geologists to the evidence of ancient tsunamis. For too long, we have seen these two ways of knowing as separate, even antagonistic, but they are converging on a shared truth. The deep time of geology and the deep memory of oral tradition are telling the same story, a story of a planet that is dynamic, volatile, and prone to sudden, catastrophic change. The survivors of these changes were the ones who paid attention, the ones who learned to read the subtle signs of a shifting world, and, most importantly, the ones who remembered. They encoded their knowledge in stories that could survive the collapse of a culture or the drowning of a coastline. As we face our own period of profound climate instability, there is a deep and urgent wisdom in these ancient voices. They are whispering to us across the millennia, reminding us that survival is not just a matter of technology, but of memory. We forget the lessons of the long cold at our peril. The story we tell ourselves about the past is a simple one, a linear progression from the primitive hunter-gatherer to the sophisticated farmer, from the cave to the city, from superstition to science. But the evidence paints a much stranger, more complex picture. You are standing in the middle of a vast circular enclosure on a remote hilltop in southeastern Turkey. This is Göbekli Tepe, and it changes everything. Around you, enormous T-shaped pillars of limestone, some weighing over 10 tons, are arranged in a series of rings. They are carved with stunningly beautiful reliefs of animals, foxes, boars, cranes, lions. The site is exquisitely sophisticated, both artistically and technically. And it is 11,600 years old. That is 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the pyramids. It was built by people who, according to our conventional timeline, should have been simple, nomadic hunter-gatherers. There is no evidence of settlement here. No hearths, no houses, no granaries. People did not live at Göbekli Tepe. They came here to build it. They were a pre-agricultural society, yet they were capable of organizing the massive labor force required to quarry, transport, and erect these monumental structures. What does this mean? It means that the neat story of progress is wrong. It suggests that complex religion, sophisticated symbolism, and large-scale social organization may have come before agriculture, not as a result of it. Perhaps the need to feed the hundreds of workers who gathered here to build this temple was the very catalyst that spurred the invention of farming. We have been telling the story backwards. The spiritual revolution may have preceded the agricultural one. The great temple came first, and the city followed, growing up around it to feed the gods and the people who served them. Göbekli Tepe is a profound challenge to our idea of the primitive. It asks us to consider a past that was not a straight line, but a tangled, branching tree, with moments of extraordinary brilliance that flicker and then vanish, leaving behind only these enigmatic stones, a silent testament to a chapter of the human story. We are only just beginning to learn how to read. The most haunting mystery of Göbekli Tepe is not how it was built, but how it ended. Around 8000 BC, after 1500 years of continuous use, the entire site was deliberately and meticulously buried. Millions of tons of earth, stone, and animal bone were brought in to entomb the great pillars, preserving them perfectly until their rediscovery in our own time. Why would a people bury their most sacred site? Some archaeologists believe the act was a kind of ritual decommissioning, a signal that the world had changed. The end of the Younger Dryas had brought a new era of climate stability. The wild herds were abundant again. The first experiments with agriculture were proving successful. Perhaps the terrifying animal gods of the Ice Age, the capricious spirits of a world of scarcity and fear, were no longer needed. The burial of Göbekli Tepe was a closing of a book, a turning of a page. Humanity was moving on, but there is another, more unsettling possibility. What if the burial was an act of preservation? The site is aligned to the stars with a precision that speaks of a deep astronomical knowledge. Carvings on one of the pillars appear to be a kind of star map, depicting the constellations as they would have appeared in the sky over Turkey thousands of years before the temple was built. Some researchers have even suggested that the carvings are a record, a warning of the Younger Dryas impact event itself. Could it be that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were the survivors of a lost civilization, the inheritors of a sophisticated knowledge that they sought to preserve in stone. Did they bury their temple not to forget it, but to ensure it would be remembered? A message in a bottle for a future civilization that could read the language of the stars. The silence from this hilltop is profound. It is the silence of a people who saw something extraordinary and who left us a riddle that resets the very clock of civilization. The air in the Amazon rainforest is thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. You are in a maloca, a traditional longhouse of the Tucanoan people, the light filtering in dusty shafts through the thatched roof. An elder hands you a small carved wooden cup. The liquid inside is thick, brown, and bitter. This is ayahuasca, the sacred vine of the Amazon, a powerful psychedelic brew made from two different plants that have been a central part of shamanic practice in this region for thousands of years. The knowledge required to make this brew is itself a profound mystery. There are over 80,000 species of plants in the Amazon. How did the first shamans know to combine these two specific plants, one containing the powerful psychedelic DMT, the other containing an enzyme inhibitor that allows the DMT to be absorbed by the body? It is a feat of psychopharmacology that modern science has only recently come to understand. When you ask the elder, he smiles. The plants taught us, he says. For the people of the Amazon, the plant world is not a collection of inert resources. It is a world of intelligent, conscious beings, of spirits that can be communicated with. The shaman is the diplomat, the ambassador to this other world. Through the use of psychoactive plants, he enters a trance state, travels to the spirit world, and negotiates with the plant and animal spirits on behalf of his people. He asks the spirit of the ayahuasca vine for healing, the spirit of the coca plant for strength, the spirit of the peyote cactus for vision. This worldview, once dismissed as primitive superstition, is now being re-examined in the light of what we are learning about the deep past. Could the shamanic traditions of the Amazon be a living link to the spiritual world of our most ancient ancestors? The cave paintings of Lascaux and other sites are often found in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the caves, places of profound darkness and sensory deprivation. Many researchers now believe that these were not just art galleries, but shamanic portals, places where the hunter-shamans of the Ice Age traveled to the spirit world to bargain with the animal gods that held the key to their survival. The vine of the Amazon may be a living thread, connecting us to the very dawn of the human spiritual imagination. The evidence for this ancient spiritual technology is not just anecdotal. You are in a laboratory in Zurich, watching a scientist prepare a sample for a mass spectrometer. The sample is a fragment of a ceramic drinking vessel, recovered from a 3,500-year-old temple site in Crete, the heart of the Minoan civilization. The vessel is decorated with the image of a poppy, its head scored to show the extraction of opium. The chemical analysis is unambiguous. The residue inside the cup contains high concentrations of opioids. This was not a vessel for water or wine. It was a chalice for achieving an altered state of consciousness. Similar evidence is found across the ancient world. Residues of cannabis in ritual burners from ancient Israel, traces of psychoactive mushrooms on figurines from Mesoamerica, the blue water lily, a mild hallucinogen depicted everywhere in Egyptian funerary art. The Vedic texts of ancient India are filled with hymns to a mysterious divine plant called soma, which produced a powerful visionary state. For our ancestors, The line between the sacred and the psychoactive was not just blurry, it may not have existed at all. What role did these substances play in the great transition from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic? Some scholars have proposed the stoned ape hypothesis, suggesting that psychedelic mushrooms consumed by our early hominid ancestors may have acted as a kind of evolutionary catalyst, expanding consciousness and jump-starting the development of language and culture. It is a controversial idea, but it speaks to a deeper truth. The human mind is not a static thing. It has a history, and that history has been shaped, in part, by our long, strange, and often sacred relationship with the psychoactive plants of the earth. The shaman's journey was not just a metaphor. It was a real, repeatable, and profoundly important technology for understanding the world and our place within it. It was a way of feeding a different kind of hunger, the hunger for meaning. It all comes down to this. You hold a single grain of wheat in the palm of your hand. It is small, humble, deceptively simple. Yet this is the most transformative technology our species has ever invented. More powerful than the hand axe, more world-changing than the atom bomb. This tiny seed contains within it the germ of a new world, a world of cities, of empires, of writing, of law. It contains the surplus that freed some hands from the soil to become priests and kings, poets and scientists. But it also contains a shadow. It contains the logic of the fence, of the wall, of the standing army to protect the harvest. It contains the seeds of social inequality, of the peasant tied to the land, of the king who owns the surplus. It contains the vulnerability of the monoculture, the spectre of the famine that can wipe out millions. And it contains the deep, resonant echo of the world that was lost. The world of the hunter was a world of fierce autonomy, of profound intimacy with the natural world, of a mind that was fluid, adaptable, and free. We traded that freedom for the security of the granary. Was it a good trade? It is a question that haunts us. We live in a world of unprecedented abundance, a world built on the foundation of this single grain of wheat. Yet we are also a species that is profoundly disconnected from the sources of our own sustenance. A species that is deeply anxious about the future of the planet that we have so radically transformed. The story of what we ate is the story of who we are. It is a story of desperate survival and extraordinary innovation, of profound loss and unimaginable gain. To hold this grain of wheat in your hand is to hold the entire contradictory, heartbreaking, and beautiful story of us. It is a choice we made 10,000 years ago, and we are living with the consequences for better and for worse to this day. The fluorescent lights of the supermarket hum above you. You walk down an aisle, a corridor of impossible abundance. Fruits and vegetables from every corner of the globe, available in any season. Grains milled to a fine, uniform powder. Meats wrapped in plastic, stripped of any resemblance to the animal they came from. This is the end point of the story, the culmination of the 10,000-year journey that began with a single seed. We have conquered winter. We have banished hunger to the margins of our world. But look closer. The echoes of the past are here, hidden in plain sight. The very structure of our modern diet, the heavy reliance on a few staple grains like wheat, rice, and corn, is a direct legacy of the first agricultural experiments, a narrowing of the vast and varied diet of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. The cultural significance we attach to bread, the symbolic heart of so many meals and religions, is an echo of the life or death importance of the first harvests. Our craving for sugar and fat, the drivers of our modern obesity epidemic, is the ghost of a metabolism that was wired to seek out the rarest and most valuable calories in a world of scarcity. Every meal we eat is a conversation with our deep past. We are shaped in ways we are only beginning to understand by the hunger of our ancestors, by the choices they made, by the worlds they lost. The story of what they ate is not a distant academic curiosity. It is the story of the bodies we inhabit, the societies we have built, the anxieties that still haunt our dreams. To walk through this supermarket is to walk through a museum of our own success, a testament to the long, hard road from the mammoth steppe. But it is also a reminder of the profound debt we owe to those who came before, and of the fragility of the abundance we so easily take for granted. The winter is over, but the memory of the cold remains. You are in a marketplace in Oaxaca, Mexico, a vibrant explosion of color, sound, and smell. The air is thick with the aroma of roasting chilies, of fresh cilantro, of the rich, dark scent of mole. A woman stands over a hot comel, pressing a small ball of mesa into a perfect, thin disc. She slaps it onto the hot clay, and in a moment, it puffs up into a perfect tortilla. This simple act, repeated millions of times a day across Mexico, is a living ritual, a direct link to the dawn of agriculture in the Americas. The corn she is using is not the uniform, super-sweet yellow corn of the industrial food system. It is heirloom maize, the kernels a mosaic of blue, red, and white, the direct descendant of the wild grass called teosinte that was first domesticated in this valley 9,000 years ago. This is not just food. It is a library. Each of these heirloom varieties is a book, a chapter in the long story of the relationship between a people and their land. This blue corn is drought-resistant, its roots running deep into the dry soil. This red corn grows at high altitudes, its stalk short and sturdy against the mountain winds. This genetic diversity is not an accident. It is the product of millennia of careful observation and selection, a conscious and sophisticated partnership between humans and the plant world. But this library is burning. In the last century, industrial agriculture has pushed thousands of these heirloom varieties to the brink of extinction, replacing them with a handful of high-yield, genetically uniform hybrids. We are losing not just flavors and colors, but the deep accumulated wisdom of the past. We are losing the genetic resilience that could be our best defense against the uncertainties of a changing climate. The fight to preserve these ancient strains of corn, of wheat, of potato is not just a matter of nostalgia. It is a fight for the future. It is a recognition that the knowledge of the first farmers, the survivors of the long winter, may be the very thing we need to survive the winters to come. The library is burning, and we are running out of time to save the books. The story of what we ate is a journey from the visceral to the virtual. You sit at your desk, a world of information at your fingertips. With a few keystrokes, you can access the genetic code of aurochs, the extinct wild cattle that were the ancestors of our modern herds. You can read the isotopic analysis of a Neanderthal bone, or pull up a satellite map of the submerged coastlines of the Ice Age. We have technologies of memory and foresight our ancestors could not have dreamed of. We have mapped the past and modeled the future. We know, with a terrifying degree of certainty, that the climate is changing again. The long, stable, predictable climate of the Holocene, the 10,000-year summer that gave birth to agriculture and civilization, is ending. The ice is melting, the seas are rising, the old certainties are dissolving. We find ourselves, in a strange way, back where we started, a small, clever, and profoundly vulnerable species, facing a world of unprecedented change. The questions our ancestors faced are our questions once again. What will we eat? How will we organize ourselves? What stories will we tell ourselves to make sense of it all? The past is not a foreign country. It is a mirror. In the desperate resourcefulness of the Ice Age hunter, in the patient wisdom of the first farmers, in the astronomical genius of the megalith builders, we see the reflection of our own best qualities. We are the inheritors of their resilience, their creativity, their profound capacity for adaptation. The story is not over. The final chapter has not been written. We are the knowledge keepers now. And what we choose to remember, what we choose to preserve, what we choose to build, will determine what story the future tells about us. The long winter is coming, and the fire is in our hands.